question. So that's the reason why you have to write down not only the amount. Im zochrin zman ksivas hashtar yichtavu gam kein al shtar chov shezmano kach v'kach. And if they remember the date that the loan took place, they have to write down the date of the loan. V'im ein zochrin zman ksivas hashtar. This is where we were up to yesterday. And if they don't remember the date of the loan, yizaharu shelo lichtov zman ksivas hashover b'shover. Then they should not write down the date of the writing of the receipt. Kishema ichru zman ksivas hashtar b'shtar sheshtar chov hameucharim ksherim. He says, because for all we know, maybe they post-dated the promissory note, the initial promissory note, because as we know, post-dated promissory notes are kosher. Predated promissory notes are not kosher. Post-dated promissory notes could potentially be a problem, but b'diavad they're kosher. V'nimsa shelifa'amim yihiyeh zman hashover kodem lizman ksivas hashtar ve'eino mo'ol klum l'shtar zeh. So if you don't know the date that was written down in the original promissory note, then you should not write the date in the receipt, because for all we know, maybe the date on the promissory note was post-dated. And if we write the date on the receipt, it could be the date on the receipt will actually be prior to the date that's written on the note. And if that's the case, then if the creditor comes forward with the promissory note, the receipt is useless because the receipt has the date that was dated from the day that it was written. And therefore, you should only write the date on the receipt if at least the debtor remembers the date that was written in the shtar. Okay, so let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. So obviously, we're not going to be able to make any transaction bulletproof. There's always room for her hanky-panky, right? There's always room for trickery and for deceit. But we want to try and close as many holes as we can. So in the Imrei Yaakov, he says, if the parties remember the time that the date was written, the date that was written in the shtar, hu hadinim yodim bevadai shahazman hu lifnei zman hashovar. He says, and let's say they don't know the exact date, but they know for sure that whatever date we wrote in the shtar is before today. That much we know. We may have post-dated the shtar by a couple of days, but it was over a month ago that the loan was made. So we know, for example, let's say we know that the loan was written in January. The promissory note, we put in a date in January, but we know for sure that it was not in February. And today is February 23rd. So if so, then it's perfectly fine for us to put a date in the shover, and we should, to give more strength to the debtor in the event that the creditor comes forward with another claim. Now, kasvu haposkim deshover meuchar pasel dedami l'shtar mukdam. The poskim write that a post-dated shovar, a post-dated receipt, is just as unkosher as a predated promissory note. Now, what's the logic involved? If you post-date a receipt when the guy paid back his money, the Shema Chazar v'hilvehu achar hamachila hazos. He says, because if you post-date a receipt, you have to be concerned that the debtor will use that to take advantage of the creditor a second time. So I paid you back the money. Would you mind lending me? Do you mind spotting me another $10,000? He comes back to him the next day. The guy, out of the goodness of his heart, says, okay. But the problem is that the receipt was dated for a week after I paid you back yesterday. So it turns out that I have a receipt for payment not only of the first $10,000, but I have a receipt that could be used to indicate that I paid you back the second loan of $10,000. And that's going to be a problem. So the Hanal Yotzi Shovru Shenichtav al Halvos HaKodmos, and therefore the debtor will produce a receipt for the prior loan, which has nothing to do with the loan that he gave him yesterday. So he'll use it improperly. So therefore, we have to protect the creditor in that kind of situation and make sure that the receipt is written on the proper date. Okay, let us go weiter. Okay, nun gimel. Asur lahashos shtar parua o machul besoch beso. It is forbidden to allow a a promissory note that has already been paid. It's usher to leave it in your home. You have to destroy it immediately. In other words, once the debtor pays back the loan, let's say he doesn't ask for the promissory note in exchange. He trusts you. But what happens if you die and one of your family members finds that promissory note? They're not going to know that the guy paid you back, and they're going to go after him in court, and they'll be able to collect on it. So, and that's true also if you forgave the loan. If you went over to your friend who owes you money, and he wrote you a promissory note, and you say to him, you know what, I'm moichel. I consider it a gift. You shake hands, and you forgive the loan. The problem is that your wife doesn't know about it, and if she did, she would give you two black eyes, right? And you don't want to tell her because you don't want to start a fight. So you don't tell her that you forgave the loan to your friend of $10,000. And then she looks through your papers and she finds this note. So, that could create serious problems, serious legal problems. Okay. So, afal pisha halova ma'amino, even when the debtor trusts you, the creditor, that you're not going to go after him, you still can't keep it in your home. Why? Mishum shenemar va'al tashkein bi'ohalecha avla. It says in the book of Eov, do not allow to have anything that is perverse dwell in your home. So if it's representative of something that's no longer true, if there's a document in your home that is a false document, you're not allowed to keep it in your home, which is sort of a general principle that any kind of document that contains falsehoods in it should not be left in your home. That would include promissory notes, and it might include other things. Can you imagine what other kinds of documents it might include? Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. You have to really destroy your old wills. You have to destroy any document that no longer has legal standing. It could also be. Yeah, but there's nothing false about those documents. Yeah. You'd have to write on it. Yeah. You can void it, right? So va'afilu kasav alav shovar. He says, and even if you wrote a receipt to the debtor, you still can't hold on to the promissory note. Ad sheyichtavenu al gabe hashtar, right? And this is exactly to Doug's point. Unless you write on the shtar itself, v'hu sheparu akulo, this has been paid in full. In other words, in those days they didn't have stamps, or maybe they did, but you can also write it out in hand. This debt has been paid in full. Aval im nishar chayav lo, afilu pruta mutter la'akev hashtar. He says, if, however, the debtor has only made partial payment on the note, and he still owes you some remnant on the debt, even if it's just a small amount, even if it's just a few pennies that he still owes you. Like, in other words, the debt was for $10,000.69, and he gave you a check for $10,000. technically you're allowed to hold on to that promissory note for the 69 cents that's remaining. Not
guarantee, even though the debt was paid. You want to get paid twice.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you represented the Shmen, the guarantor,
Yeah.
not you wouldn't represent the Shmendrik, yeah. Okay.
So it was paid, but it's hard to prove that it was paid. The guy just his word against the guarantor.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
The borrower paid it back and then couldn't find it.
right.
Then this guy, they didn't like each other. So he said, it was commercial partners or whatever. So he went after his old partner. I think it was $50,000 on the guarantee where the debt was paid, but it was a question of proof. So,
Did you eventually find enough evidence?
Yeah, it was a hard case. It happens.
When you say you settled it, I mean the guy did have to end up paying?
Ended up paying bucks, but there were other things of him. It was a whole big partnership online. Part of the whole.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. But banks do that too. If you ever sign a guarantor, which you never should, you get the bank to put cancel on it or rip it up, but they usually keep it. And they put on it a big stamp that says paid in full or canceled or void, whatever it is. So no one could ever, use it.
Okay.
You say right now that accounting systems nowadays for invoices, it's half experience that people doesn't pay the cents. So they owe you $100.20. They pay $100 and they look at the cents. So the accounting system nowadays, they keep the invoice alive. And they keep reminding you 60 days over, 90 days over.
And then they charge interest.
25 cents. And it's like, you can never finish because it's always open. But people, they don't pay cents. It's very often that people say, I can pay you $100, forget about the 25 cents. But if it doesn't match, it doesn't match. So the system keeps the invoice open.
Yeah, and then they end up spending so much more money on printing invoices and postage and
sometimes more expensive the printing than the cents that they own you. But the problem is that you cannot close your accounting because you have always something open.
Right.
And it's a big issue.
I know. Yeah, it's crazy.
So I'm fascinated with all through this. I don't think we've ever covered it, but why didn't they just flip the star over, split blank side, and just write the amount of the part payment of the full payment of the date side on the back of the star and got everything together? It hasn't said it.
Well, it would make sense to just tear up the note or to write, if it's only partial payment has been made, to write on the note itself, this amount has already been paid. That's what you should do. That would be the preferable way to do it. But what if I happen to meet the guy in shul and he doesn't have the paperwork? And I just say to him, look, I want to get this off my chest. I've got 70% of the loan and I'm giving it to you right now. Just write me a piece of paper that says that you received it and we'll settle up the difference later. I mean, there are many circumstances where it's just not practical, especially in days before they had automobile transportation. It was often a lot, and there was illiteracy also. A lot of times people were illiterate. Yeah.
You have to have one keep the receipt and the one has to start. So
Right. The creditor has the paper.
Friend comes to him and pays him 70,000, but maybe he pays for whatever. However, he notes it, but on the back of the star, it says 70,000 on 20.
Yeah.
30,000. Then
Right.
2 months later, whatever.
Yeah. Clearly that would clear up a lot of issues, right? Right. But a lot of times it's not. It's just it's not practical for whatever reason. Okay. Okay. Weiter. V'husha parua kulo. Avalim nishar chayv lo afilu pruta mutar la'akev hashtar v'lichtov shovar. You're always allowed to write a receipt if there's still outstanding owed on the debt. the im halova ma'amino below shovar mutar. And if, let's say, the debtor says to the creditor, I'm paying you 70 grand, I still owe you 30. So the creditor says, well, let me write you a receipt. I don't have the promissory note on me. Well, says, no, don't worry. I trust you. I know you're not going to go after me for the full amount. I gave you the 70. That's fine. Umikol makom ein lo la'akev hashtar bishvil schar hasofer shanasan hu ba'ad halova. Shahalova chayav l'shalem schar hasofer. He says, however, it's not okay in the event that the lova pays you in full, pays the full debt. You say, as the creditor, I still want to hold on to the promissory note because you owe me the fee for the scribe. You owe me the scribal fee. And so I'm not going to tear up the promissory note until not only do you pay the debt, but you pay the scribal fee, because halachically, the debtor is obligated to pay for the scribe's fee. Even if the loan was made on what's called machatzi schar, which is, it was also done as a business investment. In other words, if you could, one of the ways that we get around ribis, get around interest, is that we make the loan half as a loan and the other half is a business investment. And the debtor is paying back interest on the investment, not on the loan. Okay, and that was, if we ever go and study Hilchos Ribis, we'll get into that a little bit more. But even in that kind of business transaction, it is still incumbent upon the debtor who's receiving the money as a loan / investment to pay for the scribe's fee. And let's say the lova really is completely, has no money. And it turns out that not only does the malva have to loan him the money, but he also has to pay the scribe. And he says, listen, when you pay back, I expect you to pay me back not only for the 100 grand I lent you, but for the $100 that it costs to pay the scribe. He says, and the debtor agrees. So the creditor is not allowed to hold on to the promissory note and say, no, I'm not giving you back the note until you pay the scribe's fee. As long as he pays back the debt in full, you have to surrender the note. Why? And the reason is because the promissory note has no record of that $100 that was laid out for the sofer. And because the note itself has been paid in full, the 100 grand that's recorded in the note has been paid in full, and it is an outstanding fee of $100 that the guy still owes, but it's not recorded in the note. The note has nothing to do with that separate debt. And therefore, you have no right to hold on to the promissory note because the guy still hasn't paid the scribe's fee. And who knows? Will the guy pay it back? He won't pay it back. It's called a milva al peh. It's called an oral loan. It's an oral debt. It was not a recorded debt. And therefore, hopefully the guy will be honest and fair and show hakaras atov and his appreciation and will pay it back. But you can't go after him with that note because the note doesn't record it. And you can't therefore hold on to it because he's paid back the debt in full. And then he writes, Va'afilu im haniyar gamkein shel hasofa, v'nimsa sheguf hashtar shelo. He says, let's say the scribe provided the paper, and he basically said, the scribe said, I'm holding on to the ownership of this contract, but this is not really a practical halacha nowadays because we don't do this. We don't have the scribe hold on to ownership of the paper, right? Usually there's a scribe, there would be what we would call it, a lawyer. A lawyer would draft the paperwork, but the lawyer would relinquish the paperwork to his clients, right? To the parties of interest. He wouldn't say, well, the paper still belongs to me. But back in those days, parchment was expensive. And the sofer might say, until I get fully paid, I retain ownership of the paper. Latzer al pitzluchiso ad sheyashalim ba'ado. And the sofer could say, parchment, even parchment that has writing on it, is useful. Because, people would used to thatch their roofs with parchment. I know a story. My mother told me the story that a friend of hers was once in post-war, I think was it post-war Germany? I'm not sure which country it was. And he sees one of these street merchants selling old pieces of parchment. And he looks at it. It turns out it's from a Sefer Torah. So he didn't want to let the guy know that he was a Jew, because, or it must have been Poland or something, post-war. So he said, what is that? He says, well, it's an old thing from the Jews, So he says, well, I'd like to buy it. The guy says, what do you need it for? So he says, well, I have to thatch my roof. People would use parchment because it's made out of animal skin. So it's like leather. So they'd put it on their roof to waterproof their roofs. So parchment has other utilities other than recording transactions. So the argument that the sofer can make is, I want to get back all of my old parchment because I can use it to use it as a cork. That's what they used to use it for. They would use it for corks, for corking things, roll it up and really compress it, and then you could cork your bottles, or you could use it as a door stopper, or you could use it for other utilities as well. Use it as wallpaper, whatever. The point is, the sofer says that parchment has value, and I expect to be compensated for it. You haven't paid me back. So the creditor could argue to the debtor, listen, buddy, until you pay back what you owe the sofer can claim that he retains ownership of that parchment. I'm going to give it to the sofer instead of giving it to you. He says, no. He says, however, the creditor should never keep it in his possession or surrender it to the sofer unless he tears it up first. So in other words, tear up the parchment, tear it in half. So at least that way, it can't be used as a financial instrument anymore. And it goes without saying that you can't hold on to a promissory note that has been paid in full just because the guy may owe you money from some other area. In other words, like in your case, Marvin, the guy the Schmendrick who went after your client, probably justified it in his mind because he was a former partner and he felt that his former partner owed him money from some other place. So he figured, you screwed me, I'll screw you back. Yeah, right. That was probably it was leverage, right? So you're not allowed to do that. If the debt has been paid in full, you're not allowed to keep a promissory note just because you feel the guy owes you money from some other source. And he finishes off with the words, v'yesh matirin. And there are some people who permit. Now, what do they permit? They permit you to hold on to a promissory note, even though it's been paid in full, if the guy has other debts that he owes you. Not that necessarily you can use it as leverage, but you can take him to Beis Din, and you'd have to explain to the Beis Din, he paid me in full for this debt, but he hasn't paid me back for the other things that he owes me, and I want to show this paper to the Beis Din. And a God-fearing person will be machmir and never hold on to a note that's already been paid, even if you can rationalize that the guy still owes you money from other sources.
You have no right to get your paperwork from the file at all. You can hold it. It has a actual lien on it.
Right.
You pay them.
Right.
Yeah.
But how often is that done? In other words,
I've never-
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a
Okay, we'll hold it here for today.